And this is one of the major risk factors that you have in Australia. A lot of investors and beginners, even property professionals, they mistakenly think that they can generate outstanding returns with units. That is not the case. Okay, we've reviewed that across all suburbs in all areas in Australia, more than 6,000 suburbs, 2 property types, houses and units over a long period of time.
Welcome to the Get Invested podcast, where we share conversations I've enjoyed with experts from all walks of life to uncover their secret know-how on where they invest their time, their skills and their money, and the benefits this has created. Get Invested helps you to live more, work less, and leave a legacy by investing now. Listen to the show to discover the top tips on how to get started, to make the most of your investment journey, and ultimately to be living the dream. More episodes can be found on iTunes or at khgroup.com.au/Get Invested. Thanks for listening, and let's get invested. Welcome, freedom fighters. This week, I want to focus on how we make decisions. So how do you make important life-making decisions? Do you just rely on gut feel and go for it and hope for the best? You talk to friends and family or your mates at the pub? Or at the other end of the scale, do you suffer from analysis paralysis, where you get so lost in researching just tons of data that you never actually make a decision? And if you've read my book, The Freedom Formula, you'll know that making no decision and doing nothing is actually a decision to go backwards. And it's actually the biggest risk of all. Let's take an example of securing a home or an investment property. Now, hundreds of thousands of your dollars are at risk, yet many people spend less time planning and researching the best property to suit them than they do planning their holiday or buying their new car. For others, many spend countless hours analysing multiple sources of data from realestate.com.au or RP Data or CoreLogic and many other sources. But there's an issue here. That data is all historic. It's what's happened in the past. It's not what's going to happen in the future. It's like looking through the rear vision mirror when what you really need is a future-looking set of binoculars or a telescope. So where do you go to get forward-looking information that interprets the factors that will influence the ongoing performance of property, as opposed to just looking at historical data? Well, up until recently, you can follow the criteria that I've outlined in my book to identify the things that are going to influence growth zones, but it'll still take you a lot of time that most of us just don't have. And the result? What will tend to happen is that you'll make best guesstimates that really don't tally with a structured analysis of the true risks versus the likely rewards. However, today's guest, Doron Peleg, has the answer we've all been waiting for. His business RiskWise enables you to access tailored, forward-projecting and detailed risk rating reports for each and every property based on a unique integrated multi-risk factor algorithm. At last, at your fingertips, you have more comprehensive and easy-to-read property performance forecasts that are linked to your specific strategy that will help you to make insightful, fully informed and educated decisions on property. And importantly, these reports are totally independent and impartial, and they're not influenced by any vested interests. RiskWise Property Reports have been built around Doron's 20 years of experience in risk management, alongside with his personal property experience and passion. I was really lucky enough to meet Doron and spend quite a bit of time with him at last year's National Property Expo in Melbourne. And I was immediately excited about the life-changing potential of his RiskWise Property Reports. During our very informative and lively discussion, you'll find out if hotspots actually outperform the market. You'll understand the massive risk that the Labor Party's proposed changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax pose to property owners if they get in at the next election. And you'll enjoy learning which sex is better at investing and why. You'll also hear Doron's thoughts on which areas around Australia will provide the best property growth potential and his reasons why. It's really worth having a listen to that. This is a great conversation which is absolutely jam-packed with great property insights. So make sure you take the time to enjoy Doron Peleg. Welcome back, Freedom Fighters. It's Bushy Martin from Get Invested. And today we've got the real pleasure of spending some time with Doron Peleg. Now, I've had the real pleasure of meeting Doron at the National Buyers Expo in Melbourne last year. And I was struck immediately by his passion, his energy, and most importantly, his desire to help Australians get impartial, independent and informed advice on the future of property in a particular area. Now, I haven't met anyone in all of my years in property that's done that, Doron. So I'm really excited about you. I'm really excited about RiskWise. Welcome to Get Invested, mate, and looking forward to the chat.
Excellent. Bushy, thank you so much for the warm introduction. And really, for me, I'm honored to be on your podcast.
No, it's terrific, mate. While I know you quite well, and there'll be a lot of Australians who are still starting to get a feel for yourself and RiskWise. But for those that haven't heard of you at all, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so basically, I'm originally from Israel. I was a partner in accounting and consulting firm, dealt with risk management for many years. And then when I sold my practice, I moved to Australia. I work in the corporate environment, IAG, Westpac in senior positions. And then I left Westpac to establish RiskWise Property Research. So we are Australia's most innovative research house, and we have one objective, to provide risk assessment and projected returns for individual properties, development, suburbs, and areas across Australia, and to truly help all the layers on the market, from property investors, professionals, developers, and even the lenders, to better make decisions. Because what we've seen is that a lot of people, particularly mom and dad investors, they just make mistakes that sometimes cost them a lot of money. So for us, this is the vision, to bring truly an independent, unbiased research house, and to provide only one thing, with research, risk assessment, and forward-looking view.
Fantastic, mate. Look, very refreshing, because it's an area that really hasn't been tackled at all in property. And there's a lot of risk management process that goes into the shares and equities market, but I've seen very little in property. But before we drill into that and the benefits of what RiskWise is doing, I'm interested to go back to those early days in Tel Aviv. And what I'm really wanting to dig into a little bit, Doron, is obviously you have a passion for risk and risk management, and it's a thing that very few people spend much time on. So can you share with us why you were attracted, from a personality and from a motivation perspective, why were you attracted into that area, and how has that benefited you up until RiskWise?
So that's a good question. Basically, what people do, they try to be over-optimistic in many cases. Now, it could be mom and dad investor, and it could also be, as you have seen lately with the Royal Commission, it could be a CBA and AMP and very large corporations. Okay, they have the emotional side. Sometimes people are overconfident in what they're doing, and they're sometimes they're not really realistic. Now, the philosophy or the concept that I have is just say it as it is. Yeah, if it's good, green light, low risk, all good, proceed, go on. Yeah. But if things go south, or they are very likely to go south, okay, and sometimes it's very, very unpleasant for people to hear what we're saying. Even CEOs and CFOs of very large corporations, they're not really happy to hear bad news, right?
Yes.
But that's my motto. Say it as it is. Help people, help organizations make better decisions. Because otherwise things go south, and then people just try to blame other people. They blame themselves. They blame the weather. They blame the reality. But the point is that in many cases they could have prevented or significantly mitigated the risk. And the only thing that they needed to do is just, as I like to tell my daughter is 9, put your listening ears on. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. And is that something that's been inherent in you, Doron, right from the earliest days? Or were you surrounded in a family that just intuitively would look at a situation and say, now, what's the risk and what's the rewards of this? Or is that something that you've learnt along your education journey? Where did that passion for risk assessment come from?
Actually, it came, I think, from my grandmother. I mean, I lived in Israel, and she came from Germany, the Holocaust. And for her, particularly with finance, she always thought about things that could go wrong, to have appropriate savings, to have the right investments, to think about the future. When I was, I think, maybe 5 or 6 years old, okay, she told me that she needs to think about, a separate fund for my university. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
And when you have that mindset, and when you have a more realistic view, and you hear a lot of people around you, and in many cases well-educated people, how they make decisions, how they think about the opportunities, but also on the risk, then eventually you start learning more and more, and you get a certain exposure. But then obviously when you go to the army, the Israeli army, everything is about risk. You have so many restrictions, so many things that you cannot do. And when I just started actually the basic training in the Israeli army, one of my commanders told me each and every one of those instructions is as a result of one thing. At least one person has been killed, okay, because they have not complied with those instructions, right?
Yep.
So that's why they're here. So it's there all the time. And when you go to the uni, then you have a formal education. You learn macroeconomics and accounting, internal audit, external audit. So all of those things together also feed very strongly into risk management. And again, then financially, you take a look at your personal circumstances, and you have to take that approach. Otherwise, things will just go south, and you hear a lot of stories about people who lose their houses and companies that become bankrupted, etc. So it's basically many small learnings.
Yeah, I love it. We have a saying that, and I'll be interested in your thoughts on this when we're helping potential property investors, and that is to plan for the worst and then expect the best. So if we've looked at every contingency, and normally in our situation with those that we help, we'll set up what we call a separate war chest of funds that cost them nothing if they don't use it. But if something goes wrong, either with their own personal life or with the property, they can survive very comfortably for a minimum of 6 months with that rainy day reserve that's been set up to accommodate that. Is that the sort of risk approach that you're talking about generally from a lifestyle perspective, Doron?
That's a classic example, exactly. Because you can talk about this specific fund, which is again a classic example. Another good example is when you have equity in investment properties, okay? So when I just started with the investments, I talked to a very experienced and very wealthy businessman, and I told him, yeah, but look, if I buy this property and then things go south or whatever, what happens? He told me, not a problem. Just sell the property after a few years. But if you have strong belief that you can hold the property for the next 3 to 5 years, that's it. Just go for it.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, that's fine. That's part of the game.
Yeah.
And that's it. So when you buy and when you have a certain fund like the fund that you are mentioning, which is brilliant, or you build equity in an investment property,
Yes.
and you know that if things go south, you have in one property $350,000.
Yep.
So that's fine. Things will go south, but you do have the means to deal with let's call it an unwanted situation.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's brilliant, mate. Well, tell me, in your own life, and whether it be work-wise or personally, what's the biggest risk situation that you've tackled so far, and what was the outcome of that, mate?
Risk, so many. I don't know where to start. Seriously, I think the top two, if I can. So the first one was actually when I established my first business. Okay, so I had a really comfortable position in the Ministry of Finance in Israel, a relatively senior position, well-paid position, car allowance, all good. Mm-hmm. And then I decided to leave and to establish a firm to deal only with internal audit, risk management, and to target only major institutions.
Right.
Now, at that point of time, it was 1999. And the big players, or the only players, were the big four accounting firms, PwC, Ernst & Young, etc. So,
yep.
And that was a relatively new area, right? And only the big four, only they had some capabilities and reputation in the market, right?
Right.
So when I left the Ministry of Finance and I came from the internal audit area, people told me that I'm absolutely crazy. Actually, my boss then told me, look, you're a superstar. You don't need to do anything. Just stay in your position. A couple of years, you're going to move to a very senior position, a different salary band, senior executive band, and that's it. Just stay there for the next 30, 40 years. That's it, nothing to do. Now, it was dead serious. Yeah, he was in his late 50s, yeah? So he was really serious.
Yep. And
I told him, don't worry about that. It's just not for me.
Yes. Yeah. So his description there to you, it was probably you were thinking, this would bore me to death, sitting here for 30, 40 years twiddling my thumbs. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, one of the things that he told me, you just need to sit. Yeah, don't make waves, and that's it.
Wow.
Well, all good. Things will sort themselves out. That's it. All good.
Well, that's interesting because that's the paradigm that a lot of Australians operate on. And I know myself, Doron, that for many years before I had a bit of a wake-up call, my outlook was to work hard, buy a home, pay it off, and then when I get to retirement, survive on my super and hopefully live my bucket list then. But the research I've done in my book, and I've done a lot of number crunching around this, would suggest the biggest risk that people have is doing exactly that, because the forward projections on what people are going to need to survive on if they're getting the super or their pension is going to be a tenth of what they're currently enjoying. So was that part of your thinking at the time? Was it just, no, I don't want to be bored, or no, I need to be building wealth? What was your thinking and motivation around that point?
Actually, it was a combination of a few things. The first one, obviously, you think about retirement and you think about building a proper asset base, let's call it. But the second thing, which is also, let's call it high risk, is that the risk that, the industry changes. Life change all the time, right?
Yes.
Even now, you can see people in the IT industry in the 50s, right? And many employers in the IT, they want people in the 20s or 30s or whatever, right?
Yes.
So things could go wrong because basically when you are employed by someone, you are subject to that someone's will, right? So if there are cost cuttings or redundancies or structural changes, or you just annoy another person, so even if you're a senior executive, you can just lose your job, right?
Yes.
So that was another consideration. And obviously you have the third one, which to me was important. I personally don't like to sit on my hands, and I don't like to be told, don't make waves. Yeah. You've seen the report that we have released on the negative gearing and capital gains taxes. So
yes.
You see that the federal treasurer and the shadow treasurer, they know well that RiskWise, they do make waves. Okay, we don't make waves in order to make waves. We just say it as it is. Now,
Yes.
if you want to say it as it is, and you want to have satisfaction with the work that you do, with the people around you, and you want to be yourself. So for me at least, the corporate environment is not, let's call it, not ideal.
No. So I mean, for many people, that would be seen as a brave decision. But one of the bigger, more courageous decisions from my perspective, Doron, is then uprooting yourself and coming to Australia. If you put the risk analysis against that, what was the risk reward ratio for you deciding that Australia was a place to come to, and talk to us about that?
Okay, so that was a relatively high level of risk, but the reward was outstanding. Now, I'll give you some context. I had a really good, successful firm for risk management, internal audit with really large clients.
Right.
The problem was that, I imagined, or my vision was, to build the company, which was fine. The company should do well, which was done.
Yep.
And then, to start scaling down a bit my working hours, in a sense that, I've kind of, I've life. I can do other things. I can deal with other business ventures and maybe expand overseas. But the reality was that, and this is something that I call the paradox of success. If you are successful, people want to see you more and more and more.
Yes.
You find yourself working from sometimes 7 a.m., the first phone call with a major client, till 10, 11 p.m., yeah?
Yes.
Sometimes also during the weekend. And all things that you want to do, but additional phone call that actually you should not take. One of the senior managers who worked for me could have dealt with that easily. Yeah, but the client want to see it, with zero respect to your time. And then I said, this is not really a sustainable solution. And then I started exploring a number of options. And when I moved to Australia, I knew that there was a risk, and there were a few different risks. The first one, when you come from a senior position in Israel and you go to Australia, so it's not easy to find the first job. No. Because you're too senior for, let's call it, middle management roles. And when you go to senior management roles, they tell you that you don't have the local experience, right?
Of course, yeah, of course.
Because you have to be very gentle. It was before the GFC. The unemployment rate was, 3.9, and the people who actually ran the shop were the employees, okay?
Yes.
If you do not say good morning in the right tone, a person can just leave the company and never come back. So that was the situation. So and that was a big risk, but I was really determined to move, maybe to take a small step back, to find a role in a nice company, and then to move up in the food chain till I had my own business. Now, the original plan was actually to establish something in 2008 or 9.
Right, GFC time. Ouch.
Exactly. But that was before. That was the plan in 2007, before the GFC, right?
Right.
But then the GFC came, and then I had to have a good cover in the corporate environment till economy improved a bit, and then it took some time, and then I thought about this specific venture, and I left the corporate environment and established RiskWise.
Yeah, okay. So again, I'm just going to dig in a little bit deeper there to share this with the listeners, because what I'm hearing is that you had a very clear vision of what the end destination was, but you knew which steps you needed to take to allow you to get there. So you needed, by making the break to come to Australia, you needed cash flow, so you take a corporate role. We then see the massive winds of change that the GFC brought, so sitting there to maintain your cash flow until the economy righted itself. Am I right in saying that this is sort of part of a grand plan? You always intended to have your own business, and it was just a matter of then circumstances being right for you to do that?
Absolutely. That's always the game plan. But what you need to do is to say, okay, first, you always have a game plan, okay? Not having a game plan is like going to the airport without knowing what your destination is. No, seriously.
Yeah, that's good.
Some people who can just go to the airport and say, I don't know, the first flight to anywhere, okay? But I'm different. I like to plan my trips, and that's me. So that's obviously the first thing. And yeah, absolutely. When you come to Australia, you need the job, obviously for the cash flow, but not only. It's also the corporate experience in Australia, because the culture is completely different.
Yes, good call.
In Israel, they just deliver the very, very fast, very brave, a lot of technology. In Australia, things are a bit slower. People prefer, to hold the places, to sit on the hands in many cases, to be quiet, not to make waves, not to be controversial. So it's one of the reasons that I wanted to work in a corporate was also to understand a bit more about the culture before setting my own business. But obviously, always have an end game in my mind, and always, obviously, if there are changes to the circumstances like the GFC, I have to have a plan B, and I have to work around it.
Yes. Okay. Well, RiskWise is about property. So let's talk about your personal property journey for a minute in the lead up to then talking in detail about RiskWise. What was your? Well, let me ask an initial question. Why property for you? That's question number one. So give us our thoughts around why property you think would be an asset that's worth investing in.
Okay, so actually, I can actually start with my childhood a bit.
Great.
Because I come from Israel, and Israel and both Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, which are major cities, have very similar things to Australia. The first one is very, very strong population growth.
Great.
The second one is chronic undersupply of properties in good locations. That's it.
Right.
So when you grow there, and then you see in many situations things that you have many people who buy a certain property, or people who inherited properties from their parents, right?
Yep.
And these properties are truly well located, and then you hear people around you or your parents saying, wow, so this person is currently, that's it, they can retire.
Yep.
Why? What do you mean why? They have their grandmother's apartment. And I said, so what? And they look at me, so what? So with this apartment, they can just rent it out, do absolutely nothing. It's like, it's more than the median salary. And then you hear, and they have 3 of those or something,
right,
because they're not investment properties. And you also see something that is called, now I know, that is called gentrification, in the sense that I saw in front of me an area that was really unpleasant, okay? As a kid,
yep,
I was told that don't go there, the kids that are nasty kids, and it's high crime area, and that's fine. That was an area with really bad reputation. Okay, so when you go to high school and you meet kids from that area, let's stay away. Okay, let's keep distance. That was the type of the neighborhood. And then I don't know how, in a miraculous way, 10 years later, these periodic houses with kind of a Middle Eastern style have a market valuation of $2 or $3 million.
Yeah.
And walking distance of something like 15 minutes from the CBD.
Yes.
With outstanding developers are lining up and trying to do additional stuff there. And then you see that in front of you and you say, wow, that's quite amazing. So that was the context. And then when I was 26, my partner then, a mother actually, she died from cancer.
Okay.
And my partner, she got a relatively significant amount of money.
Right.
And a decision should have been made what to do, right?
Right.
Now, you don't have 5 years or whatever to set RiskWise. You just need to make a decision in a relatively short period of time. So obviously, because of all the background and all the things that I saw around me, and people say that houses are so expensive, and when I was young, it was half the price. And there was a certain opportunity there also. So then actually I was asked to be involved, and that was actually effectively my first investment.
Right.
Later on, obviously, I had more long-term plan investments.
Yeah, awesome. So your first entree into property was in Israel?
Yeah.
Okay. And when you came to Australia, was part of the decision-making, well, the Australian property market is similar, or was that very much a secondary thing that you discovered when you got here?
No, I saw that very quickly. Actually, before we came to Australia, obviously, I like to plan everything. So we spent roughly 1 month in Sydney and Melbourne to see how is it and what's happening in Australia and the job opportunities and people and culture and places and obviously property.
Yes.
So, and actually during that visit, we saw exactly the same problem. And we also actually identified where we wanted to live in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. Right. And we actually flagged potential options, all the area between Double Bay to Watson's Bay.
Right.
And we also knew from Israel that the only thing that you need to do for the long term is to think about, potentially to have kids. So bottom line, at least 3 bedrooms units.
Yes.
Or a house, right? So that was before even we came here. I had a very clear plan to buy property.
Right.
So when I moved and I understood a bit more about the market and all the process with loan approvals, and you need to have 6 months experience in a company.
Yep.
Then the first thing that I've done, started with the research till I found my first property in Australia.
Excellent. So, and I what I'm hearing then is that the process that you were doing personally and the risk criteria that you were using to assess your own purchases, what then triggered your idea for, gee, I could really roll this out to help other Australians and hence RiskWise? What was the thinking around that, please, mate?
Actually, it came from a couple of my friends, IT professionals, well educated. It was 2011, and then they came to me. A couple of really young people, no kids yet. They had a really brilliant plan.
Yeah.
That's what they thought, to invest in Queensland in Gladstone, because this is the number one hotspot in Australia.
Ouch.
Okay, number one. So
Okay.
I said, wait, this is a really high risk area. They said, yeah, the agent told us, they have a new friend, yeah? Their friend told them that they would get some negative responses, but they have to be positive. And he has already shown them an article from August 2011, the 100 hotspots in Australia, and Gladstone was number 2. And there was a panel of experts. Few of them are well-known experts in Australia, and I don't want to name names here, but
Sure.
I'm talking about really, really big names that you see on the media every single day. Obviously, I'm not talking about myself. I was not there yet. And they've made a decision. So they purchased 3 properties then in Gladstone, and then one more in Mackay. Overall, something like $1.9 million. A couple of years later, roughly mid towards the end of 2013, it was quite clear that the mining boom was over.
Yep.
There would be negative consequences.
Yep.
And at that point of time, I walked from my place to the ferry, and I told myself, look, it's so simple to know that those investments were high-risk areas, because every person who deals with proper investments like shares or bonds or anything can easily rate it, right? So, and I said, so the only thing is that we don't have residential property risk rating. And then I said to myself, why not? And then the answer was that the big banks or the major players in the market, don't have any interest to do it, because currently what's happening with the shares, let's say, the big investors in shares are not the mom and dad investors. Okay, these are the big funds with the billions. Okay, like superannuation funds, etc. Funds that have dozens of billions of dollars. Okay. Now, if you want to invest in those funds, you have to convince them. And for that, there are independent rating agencies. Okay?
Yes.
And obviously, they make good money because investment funds pay the rating agencies to know what are the good investments, what are the bad investments.
Yes.
Because they take the entire risk. On the other end, residential property, if there is 20% deposit, and if there is a very strong contract against the buyer or the homeowner, it means that effectively almost the entire risk is with the buyers, right?
Yes.
Let's say with the mom and dad investors. And therefore, no one is big enough to say, okay, let's establish residential property rating company, right?
Right.
And then what happens? And obviously developers don't have an incentive to set such a company, right? Because some of the developers are not really good.
No. In fact, independent rating scale would probably tell people that those developments aren't what they should be putting their money into.
Exactly. So, and then I said, okay, so if no one has an interest to do it, and there isn't such a service in Australia, let's provide that service.
Brilliant.
Then property investors know that they have one simple address, an independent company. That's what we do. Yeah, we're not buyers agents, we're not sellers agents, we don't get kickbacks, we don't get anything.
No.
And then to come fully independent and to say that's it. That's the research.
Yeah.
And this is another concept that, and something that we see a lot, because we have a lot of consumers who come and say, Yeah, but the research of that developer is saying something different. Of course it will say something different because he's a developer. He has vested interest to sell you something, and he has to sell that something.
Yep.
So obviously he's going to say that everything is great.
Of course.
Because he's not independent.
Yep, exactly right. What really pricked up my ears when we met in Melbourne last year, Doron, was that very fact that, one, it's independent, but as importantly, what I love about what you're doing is that you are producing calculated forecasts on the future opportunity, whereas every other report you get your hands on is looking in the rearview mirror at the past. And the past, as much as people say that the past is a predictor of the future, I actually disagree with that, because what the past isn't telling you is what's happening with legislation, what's happening with employment, what's happening with the economy, what's happening with rezoning, what's happening with infrastructure, because it's all of those forward changes, the improvements that are going to come that are ultimately going to influence the future value of a property. And I was really excited when I started to look at what RiskWise is doing in terms of taking on board all those macro and micro factors around what's going to be the influence on this particular property. Can you talk us through some of the key criteria that, with that unique algorithm that you've developed, that you do use to investigate the potential for a property? And let's take an example to put some flesh around this if we can, and I'll take an example that fits most of our investors. So most of our investors can afford comfortably to secure a home, and we generally suggest homes because in the sweet spot of demand, most Australians like to live in a home on a block of land. So let's say their affordable price point somewhere between $450 and $550,000. It's a home. It's a 10 to 15 year play because most of our investors are looking to go through the full property cycle to enjoy that capital growth, and capital growth is the key driver that they're looking for. So based on that bit of a profile, what are the criteria that RiskWise then would use to analyse? And then once we've talked about that, we'll delve into your thoughts around, based on that brief, where some of the current opportunities might be.
So first, an excellent question, because within the question actually, there are some answers already. Okay, so before I give a high-level overview of the approach that we have at RiskWise, actually I'll start actually with your criteria. Okay.
Okay.
The first criteria that you said home, which means a house.
Yep.
Which means you said loud and clear that you don't want a unit. Okay.
No.
And this is one of the major risk factors that you have in Australia. A lot of investors and beginners, even property professionals, they mistakenly think that they can generate outstanding returns with units. That is not the case. Okay, we've reviewed that across all suburbs in all areas in Australia, more than 6,000 suburbs, 2 property types, houses and units over a long period of time.
Great.
Statistically, houses significantly outperform units. Obviously, there are some exceptions, and usually these are in a relatively short period of time. Like today, what we see in the last year is that the housing market in Melbourne has cooled a bit, and the units deliver something like, plus 2%, and houses 1% or 0%, but that's not the game.
No.
The game is the long run.
Yes.
Now, and this is one of the key factors that we use. Another one, which is also based on the houses and units, we also look at the supply, and not only the current supply in the pipeline,
yep,
but also something that we call the potential supply.
Right.
What do I mean by that? Let's go back, and that's a good example to Gladstone 2011. Okay.
Yep.
Let's say that at that point of time there wasn't a major supply of properties, but what we did know is that potentially, because of the geographic location, right?
Yeah.
Because of a lot of pressure from the local residents of Gladstone on the council,
Right.
and because of the fact that there were some approvals, it is not that hard potentially to approve a very large number of dwellings in a relatively short period of time.
Right.
Which means the potential supply is very, very high, as opposed to, let's say, Sydney, eastern suburbs, when the location and many other factors, and not in my backyard, and other costs, you know that the potential supply is very, very low.
Yes.
Another thing that you actually mentioned in your question was actually the price range.
Yes.
And that price range is kind of healthy from an affordable perspective. What do I mean healthy? There is a certain line, and again, this is something that the algorithm takes into consideration, that on one hand, you are looking for more affordable houses with strong growth projection. On the other end, you don't want to take the risk. Now, when do you take the risk? When you go too low. If you're looking to buy a house right now in Australia for $200,000 to $250,000, well, in 99.9% of the cases, this is a really high risk area.
Yes.
Okay? So that was the second criteria that you gave us, and this is another thing that we run, obviously, in the algorithm.
Right.
The third criteria was the investment period, which was 15 years. Now, and again, this is also something that we take into consideration, and it's a very quick explanation, and obviously it's valid statistically.
Of course.
If you invest only for 1 year, you want to have, let's call it a quick flip. So let's say that you go to one of the strongest markets in Australia, Melbourne. You buy a house. You spend 5% stamp duty and legal and other stuff. You buy the property, you hope to get, 10 or whatever percent, and to sell it after, let's say, a couple of years, right? But when you sell the property, you also need to put around 2% for marketing and agent, etc., right? But apparently, at that point of time, there are lending restrictions, banking royal commission, cooling market. That's exactly what we have right now, right?
Absolutely.
So if you started your journey in, let's say, July 17, expecting to have an exit in July 19, it's not going to happen, or you're going to absorb losses. If on the other end, you wait for 15 years, and we talk again in, let's say, July 2032, I promise you that this will be a completely different conversation. And obviously, this is one of the risk factors that we have. Now, more generally, what we do, we combine dozens of data and information sources. Now, data is relatively easy to understand, right? Like the units or houses in the pipeline, and potential demand patterns and things like that. That's relatively easy to understand. Okay. By the way, regarding data, people do not know that the data that we get, RiskWise, and the data that the big corporations get, even from CoreLogic, as part of the institutional package, is completely different from the data that is available to the public. It's by far more detailed, far more sophisticated.
Of course.
Regarding data. Now, regarding the information, and that becomes more interesting. We talk about macroeconomic trends. We talk about legislation. For example, the credit restrictions, investors' activity, Royal Commission. And I want to give a couple of examples on this one. If you go back to, let's say, August 2011, and you just take a look in the back mirror, what you see? You see two-speed economy of the mining states, right? Queensland and WA, they are booming, right? And you see, let's call it the struggling economies, Sydney, New South Wales and Victoria, a lot of cost-cutting, redundancies in Sydney in the financial services. Okay,
Yes. Yep.
Many thousands of people lost their jobs, right?
Yep.
The price growth is not there. There's no strong population growth. The internal migration is not there, right?
Right.
So if you take a look at the back mirror, you say that Sydney and Melbourne are absolutely a disaster. And on the other end, you think that the mining states, particularly WA, just heaven, right? The best places ever. If on the other end, you take a long-term macroeconomic view,
Yep.
you see that actually both Sydney and Melbourne are global cities. Okay, Sydney with the financial services and the small impact that it had on the market, which was significantly smaller than the impact on let's say, the London market or
Yep.
the US market.
Yep.
You see that actually this global city was holding relatively well.
Yes.
Although there are some cost cuttings and restructuring, we're not talking about unemployment rate of 9.5% like what we saw in the US, right?
Exactly.
We see that these cities actually are traditionally and projected to be the best destination for intrastate migration, right?
Right.
We do know that eventually this cycle will be over, right? And the companies will recover and the financial services industry will recover in the long term, right?
Right.
And we see that people do want to have good access to the CBD, right?
Yes.
And you can say similar things about Melbourne, and the same thing about prices. So if you have $500,000 at that point of time, if you take a look at the back mirror, you invest in WA or Queensland, preferably one of the mining towns.
Yes.
If you have a forward-looking view, what you can do is to buy for $500,000 a property 30 minutes from Sydney CBD by train.
Yep.
Or you can buy for $500,000 something like between, I believe, 5 to 7, a property, a house, 5 or 7 kilometers from Melbourne CBD.
Yes.
So these are completely different approaches.
Yep.
And they serve us really, really good. And this is one of the reasons that from the experts, the so-called experts, on their hotspots list, they put all the mining towns and many places like that. And when these are high risk, low return areas.
Yeah, I think the key thing that you've said there, Doron, is the investment horizon, because there's so much focus on the here and now. And I guess we all live in this instant iPhone everything world, and the magazines love to jump on the stuff that creates good news. So if we talk about the mining towns, for a very, very limited period of time, 1, maybe 2 years, they have meteoric growth. But the concern has always been for me, because I've always said to investors who have come to me and said, let's go to Gladstone, let's jump on all of these mining spots in the west and up northern Queensland. And I said, well, no, let's take the growth that's coming from those and invest in the nearest capital city, where we've got a diversified economy, we've got a growing population. It's not a one-trick pony that's reliant on just one industry and a very small critical mass of people that things can turn very sharply. So use that momentum from that to invest in an area that is going to have much more sustainable growth over a much longer period of time, and that's going to give you the right results. So these hotspotters just tend to focus on the here and now in the next 12 months, which is a very dangerous horizon for most capital growth investors, don't you think?
Absolutely. Now, the problem is that these hotspots are very interesting, okay, to the news. They are newsworthy, right?
Yes.
If I'm telling you, look, I can give you as a journalist, as a reporter, 2 different stories, okay? Story number 1, Melbourne, is currently, let's say Melbourne is currently cooling, but we have very strong population growth of 125,000 people a year. Yep. It will be Melbourne, and in a few years it will be 5 million. Yep. And by the end of I don't know, 2050, it will be 8 million people city.
Yep.
You don't need to do anything, just buy and hold.
Yes.
On the other hand, I can give you a story. Sensational or outstanding capital growth in Hobart. or double-digit capital growth in Hobart has achieved again, right?
Yeah.
So this is a good story, right? And the same thing with the mining towns. When you read the story that property prices went up by, 30, 40, 60% in a short period of time.
Yeah.
The vacancy rate is effectively zero. People need to sleep on the street, even if they have money to pay rent.
Yeah.
Look, that's newsworthy, right?
Yes.
And obviously, when you have developers, and both of us, you and I, work a lot with the media, and we know that there are many media releases, right? So when we send media release, they can also send media release, right?
Yep.
So they have PR companies. And obviously, if I'm a property developer, at that point of time, we worked in Gladstone, and my objective is to run the PR campaign. Yep. So I promise you that I'm going to use every piece of information that I can to make it an interesting story.
Of course, yeah, and that's brilliant, mate. And you touched on a really good subject there, because you're right. Over the last 18 months, I've heard all the major commentators raving about Hobart. And for me, because I've been similar to you, but nowhere near as sophisticated as what you do, Doron, I have a look at the long-term view, and very interestingly, if we do that, then Hobart's come off a very low base. It's from a price point perspective, so it's very easy to get what appears to be substantial percentage increases in that format. But if you look at it over the long term, it's still pretty average growth. But more importantly, if we look at population growth, we look at the economic factors, because a lot of people are downsizing their sea changing and tree changing to Hobart because it's a beautiful place to live, and I'd be happy to live there myself. But from that sustainability, employment, income, economy, growth perspective, and the scarcity factor, because it's very easy to add, I have very serious concerns about Hobart as an investor destination in that context. What's your thoughts on that? And then perhaps expand on that to go around the country on where you think the sustainable opportunities are going to be from that growth perspective, with that brief that I mentioned in that 450 to 550 odd home range.
Yeah, sure. So let's start actually with Hobart. Bottom line, totally agree. Now, if we go to the factors, okay, so let's see what we have in the reality and what the meaning is, okay?
Yeah.
So in the reality, we did have in the past actually a very low median price. Now, saying we did have, because when prices went up, so while the price is relatively low, it's not as low as it was.
Right.
And this leads us to the meaning of housing affordability.
Yes.
Housing affordability is measured based on the house price, the household income. Now, in Hobart, people don't know that Hobart has the lowest or almost the lowest household income in Australia.
Right.
The vast majority of the jobs in Hobart are low-paid jobs. You don't have the big corporations and financial services and the big IT companies with the six figures to many, many people and white collar, right? That's not Hobart, right?
Right.
So if you take a look at the current house to ratio, the house to income ratio, and you see that in Hobart, actually, it's the third least affordable in Australia. Obviously, you have Sydney, and you have Melbourne, and then you have Hobart, which is actually relatively expensive when you check it that way. The other thing people do not know is that while the unemployment in Hobart has significantly improved, it's still the highest in Australia, more than 6%.
Right.
Traditionally, the employment there is not brilliant.
Right.
Now, the other key factor that you've mentioned rightfully, and this is something that I talked about earlier, is the potential development.
Yes.
People need to be physically in Hobart to understand. There is a lot of actual and potential development in Hobart, and just a bit pressure from the local community, and there are a lot of well-established families there, a lot of people who live there for many, many years,
Yep.
and they don't want to see the kids go elsewhere because of affordability.
Yep.
So just a bit pressure on the local government, a semi-reasonable plan, and an additional of 15 or 1,800 houses to Hobart can just change the situation dramatically. Okay,
Yep.
because this is a really small market, so any addition of supply could have a strong impact on the market. So, and the bottom line, obviously, next year most likely Hobart will deliver really healthy growth at the size of somewhere between the 8 to 10%. But that's not the question.
Yep.
The question is, if you have, let's take the $500,000 that you have right now,
Yep.
and you have investment opportunities, if you put them in Hobart versus the other options, so most likely that other options that I'll mention in a couple of minutes,
Yep.
the other options will significantly outperform Hobart.
Great.
Now, if we talk nationally, what's happening? So with that price range, you have very interesting destinations. So let's start actually with the Victoria, the western suburbs, and actually they have delivered really strong growth. You still have suburbs about 35 minutes from the CBD by train.
Yep.
With price range of the $500,000
Yep.
plus minus. Another very interesting area is Geelong. What happens and what is happening with Geelong is very interesting.
Yep.
Generally, you see a lot. First, Geelong has established itself as a city.
Yes.
It's not just a small suburb next to Melbourne. It's a city. There are some employment opportunities there. In addition, there are a lot of developments there, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of changes. So people actually have decided to move to Geelong. On top of that, you can see right now there is a big project to improve the train between Geelong to Melbourne.
Yes.
Something that will make the trip to Melbourne CBD even better.
Yep.
So all of these indications, and then you have housing affordability,
Yep.
which is a very important factor.
Yep.
Because of the Royal Commission and lending restrictions. So Geelong is also a really good destination for the long term.
Yeah, just jumping in there to talk a little bit more about Geelong, because I've had similar views, and in fact I've assisted a number of investors to secure properties in and around Geelong, and in addition to some of those factors you've mentioned, we've seen the Victorian government decentralise by putting the heads of some of their departments into Geelong. So from an employment perspective, there's good, strong and growing incomes. And then in addition to that, there's stamp duty concessions for first home buyers to be building properties in and around Geelong. So that's providing a real impetus from the owner-occupied perspective, which is always good for investors to slipstream behind. But I have seen property values already leap within a 12-month period, anywhere between $80,000 and $100,000. If we're projecting for that sustainability factor, you think it's going to continue to do that given its critical mass? What's your read around that? So probably pretty good growth in the short to medium term, then sort of levelling out over the longer term. What's your read on that, Doron?
So I think that in the short to medium term, it will outperform Victoria.
Yep.
Melbourne. And in the long term, it will be kind of similar to Victoria, because obviously the current growth that you see is unsustainable. Yeah. But on the other end, when you think about a place with still a lot of potential, a place that is growing, and obviously with the budget that we're talking about, the $500,000.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you say, okay, when I go there, so when even in the long term, when Melbourne is going up, so also Geelong is going up, because a house is a very important asset for people. They have a strong preference for houses over units.
Yes. Yes. Now, just while we're talking about that area, an area that's sort of starting to come up on the horizon a little bit is Ballarat and its environments. What's your read of Ballarat at the moment?
It's good, but not as good as Geelong, and the risk is slightly higher because of the location.
Right.
Ballarat is roughly 150 km from Melbourne.
Yeah.
The accessibility to Melbourne, which is a major employment hub, is not as good.
Yeah.
And also a lot of people, regardless to employment, a lot of people who move to Geelong and Ballarat, they have families, they have friends, they like to go out there, right, in Melbourne.
Yeah.
So for them, the distance could be an issue, which means when houses are extremely unaffordable in Melbourne, or the housing market is really booming, so obviously people have more tendency to go out, even to Ballarat.
Yeah.
But again, it's not that Ballarat is a bad idea, but if you talk about the other factors, and particularly the accessibility to Melbourne CBD and the infrastructure, so Geelong is a couple of steps ahead.
Yes.
For the long term.
Yeah, good. No, that's good. Awesome. So that's probably covered Victoria. With that budget we're talking about, where else would you be having a look at the moment for a good home for capital growth?
So obviously you have Southeast Queensland and South Australia. So if we talk about Southeast Queensland has very interesting destinations. So the first one, obviously, houses in the Gold Coast. People don't know a lot about the Gold Coast, but the Gold Coast is not units of the plan and the drunk people in Surfers Paradise. That's not the place. Okay.
Right.
The Gold Coast is nice mansions on the water, on the Mermaid Beach or Broad Beach waters. Really nice places.
Yeah.
So in that respect, houses, because of the land, enjoy really, really good demand.
Yeah.
Now, we do have the 500. There are quite a few suburbs that you can find houses there.
Yeah.
And the current demand is good. And obviously, the other side that we have is the Sunshine Coast.
Yep.
And obviously, the closer you have two options. There are other areas that are not far from Noosa, for example, Colomb Beach, the median is around the 600. So I believe that if you stretch your budget a bit, or if you're around the 550, you can find some things there.
Yep.
And obviously you can go to the other side, to the Moreton Bay area, which again became more popular. Other people who want to live not far from Brisbane, there are quite a few suburbs around 15 to 20 Ks from Brisbane CBD within your price range. And again, all of those enjoy really good long-term and sustainable demand. And let's not forget South Australia, because South Australia now is, again, showing good long-term projections of buy and hold. And obviously, you're the experts for South Australia. So
I'll be interested in your views, though. I'm always, for someone who's researching the market nationally, what are you picking up around South Australia in terms of the sorts of locations at that sort of price point that you'd be considering?
Look, to me, if I could, and again, I'm not sure if my budget is fine, but obviously the hills, Central and Hills, to me is the number one area there. Yeah. Another very interesting area is also the McLaren Vale area.
Yeah.
But generally, you have quite a few areas with good accessibility to the CBD.
Yeah.
And houses that present good value.
Yes, yeah, and there's a scarcity factor in those suburbs in and around the CBD that really have some merit, and there's the thing that sort of floats into the Adelaide market as well as there's a prestige premium. People have definite opinions about certain areas that tends to, and they tend to be in areas that've got really good school catchment zones, and a lot of families will move into those, and therefore places demand on housing prices, and it tends to attract those that have got good and strong and growing income. So from a scarcity perspective and a strong demand driver, then there's some good opportunity in that vicinity. Now, that's awesome. Okay, let's look a bit more broadly then. So we've covered those. Let's look at the flip side then, because again, we mentioned hotspots before. I'm already starting to hear some of the property commentators talking about Perth and WA. What's your read of the WA market and particular locations there that are good, bad and ugly?
Okay, so bottom line, it's a big red flag over WA currently. What's currently is happening with WA, the economy is still weak.
Yeah.
You don't see the population growth is also weak. You don't see currently, not only currently, in the foreseeable future, any demanded drivers. The economy is still in shock from the end of the mining boom. You don't see a real transition.
Yeah.
For example, as opposed to Queensland, because in Southeast Queensland, you have seen the transition.
Yes.
In WA, you don't see it yet. In all the other places that we've mentioned, we talked about the growth drivers, right, and all the positive things.
Yes.
In WA, the only discussion is, has it reached the bottom or not? So this is not a conversation that I want to have over $500,000, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
if I have $500,000, I don't need an area that I'm trying potentially to buy at the bottom. Because let's say, for our discussion, that it has reached the bottom. That is not really sure, but for our discussion, that's fine.
Okay.
So what? So let's say that I...
Scott McFarlane.
But there are no drivers in the market that will take it up. And this is what I need. I need you to take me up. I need you to build my equity. And if you're telling me it will not go back, assuming that I believe you, this is not really helpful because where I want to invest. And if I talk about 10 to 15 years, so the other destinations currently look significantly better. Obviously, in a few years, if there is a very major change in the economy or government investment of many billions of dollars or business investment, that could be a different story.
Right.
But currently, without that driver, WA is not going anywhere. And particularly, if we talk about units, and the extreme units is off the plan units currently in inner Perth.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that comment probably applies to a lot of the CBDs. I mean, I know here in Adelaide, Doron, there's been a absolute glut of inner city apartments being built, a lot of them by Chinese developers who are parking their money. There's all sorts of government incentives around stamp duties, but I keep saying to people I wouldn't touch them with a 40-foot pole. What's your read?
The same thing. Basically, what we do, and we publish our danger zones list. So you see in many cases units in the CBD, and we have a combination of problems. The first one is that the objective of the development was not to meet needs of home buyers, okay?
Yes.
It's actually just to meet needs of potential investors, many of them from overseas. We just think that the Australian market is good enough, right?
Right.
And that's not the way. Why? Because we have, let's say in Adelaide, right? We have a huge number of units.
Yeah.
High rise, usually small units,
Yeah.
are not suitable for families. You don't see demand from owner occupiers. And the price tag is relatively high. And if you take that amount of money, maybe you need to add a bit, a couple of dollars.
Yeah.
You can buy a house, a freestanding house.
Yeah.
So obviously there is oversupply. Obviously the demand is not there. So this is a toxic combination.
Yes. Yeah, that's brilliant, mate. That's awesome. Okay, one of the other area that I'm sort of hearing a little bit about for the longer term's Canberra, and it mightn't, that budget might not work in Canberra, that sort of $500,000 mark. What's your read on Canberra?
Okay, so let's start with the bad news. The bad news is that the budget will not really work.
No.
Now let's move to the good news. Canberra for a long term is a really good market, because this is one of the very few markets in Australia that presents very strong demand,
Yep.
relatively low supply,
Yep.
and very good rental return.
Right.
You have the federal government and other government agencies and ministries. They provide employment directly and indirectly to many people. So as long as the Australian government survives, and we do still have a democracy, have a lot of public servants, and you also have a lot of journalists and providers and other people who live there, right?
Yes.
Now, and in addition, people want to live usually in specific areas in Canberra, and these areas enjoy really good demand, right?
Yep.
So you also have really good demand, and you also have a lot of renters in Canberra. So overall, it's a good market. The only problem is that the first one, it's the budget,
Yep.
and the second one, it's usually a niche market, and usually you don't have a large number of properties. It's not like we talk about, let's say, the western suburbs of Melbourne, that usually with little effort we can find right now 3 potential suburbs and 15 potential properties, and we just need to start chopping around. But that's not the case in Canberra usually.
No, that's pretty tightly held and insulated too. What I like about Canberra is that because of that public service underpinning, and most public servants are employed for the long term, it gives some sustainability to that. But what sort of price point, if we're talking about a home, 3 or 4 bedroom home, what sort of money would you need to be spending in Canberra at the moment, Doron?
I think that for the good areas, I think that you need between the 700 to 800 at least.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. All right. Now, a couple of things you've already touched on, and I want to circle back to, because I think if we're putting on that future telescope rather than looking at the rear vision mirror, they potentially will have some pretty major impacts potentially on property and could be major risk factors. You mentioned briefly, the risk with the Labor federal government coming in and its impact on negative gearing and capital gains tax. Can you expand on that for our listeners in terms of what are they proposing, and more importantly, what is the likely impact if they do make those changes?
Okay, that's a good question. So what we've just completed a report of roughly 100 pages, and we sent the summary to the media, and obviously we talked to the Deputy Federal Treasurer and also the Shadow Treasurer about the report. Now, what the AFP proposes is something very simple. They propose to allow negative gearing and capital gain tax only for new dwellings, which means for off-the-plan dwellings. Okay, which means if you are an investor and you would like to buy an existing property,
yep,
that's fine by all means. However, you will not be able to enjoy the negative gearing and capital gain concessions. Now, if people do not know, currently you have 50% discount in the capital gain tax. What does it mean? That if you need to pay, let's say, 40%, instead of paying 40%, you're going to pay only 20%. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's what they propose. And also, just to clarify, if you are an investor, that's fine. This will not have an impact on you because you already hold a certain property. That property will enjoy the negative gearing until you sell it. Okay?
Yep.
Now, what are the intentions are quite clear what they wanted to do, and the rationale was investors strongly drive the market, which is correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The prices go up, so let's make that change, and we can improve housing affordability in the long term, right?
Yeah.
Now, the problems that you have are quite a few and significant problems. The first one is we have estimated the price reductions as an immediate shock of between 9% to 12%, depends on the area.
Okay, I thought that would have been a bit conservative, actually. Okay, that's. I mean, that is significant, but I thought it may have been more significant given what Paul Keating did back in the late 80s, and then was forced to reverse the whole negative gearing thing because of the impact that it had on the industry.
We try to take a conservative approach.
Yeah.
Okay, the numbers were in the beginning higher, sometimes even significantly higher. We try to take a conservative approach because we knew that every person is going to review thoroughly our report.
Okay? Of course, yeah, of course.
That's the first thing. But more importantly, what will happen is that many areas that already suffer from weakness will experience not only price reduction, but sustainable weakness. What do I mean? For example, the Perth market, you'll see roughly the 9 to 12% reduction, but also you can see a sustainable impact for a period of 3 to 5 years. And you have other areas like Darwin and Townsville and many, many other areas that could have a negative impact for years to come.
Yep.
And this is something that we call unintended consequences. And the other that we saw is that even if prices go down by 9-10% in Sydney and Melbourne, eventually, because of the chronic oversupply of houses again will go up. The only solution that is sustainable is only to increase the supply of dwellings in something that we call the middle rings.
Right.
Which means good, relatively reasonable proximity to the CBD, and to increase the supply of townhouses, duplexes, and other properties that are well suited for families.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. I just picking up on your point there, because I've been sort of saying for some time now that because all the decision makers in government and the banks tend to reside in Sydney, they become quite myopic in terms of their outlook. And they've been making wholesale changes in the lending environment in particular that, they're all patting themselves on the back at the moment because it has cooled the Sydney and Melbourne markets. There's no doubt about it, because property is a game of finance without question. But because their national policy changes, we've seen quite significant negative impacts on the rest of the country. And I get very nervous about governments who are responding to people making a noise in the press. And let's face it, this affordability discussion, Doron, it affects about 1 in 7 homeowners. So, which when I'm talking about first home buyers. So why should we be making blanket decisions that potentially have very significant, as you say, unpredicted consequences that could effectively have major impacts on a big percentage of the rest of the country as far as property is concerned?
Exactly. I think that this is the term blanket application, because one of the key problems is that when you apply the same approach across the entire country, obviously you have unintended consequences. And what we propose in our paper is to take a completely different approach, and actually to focus by far more on the supply side and to manage properly both the demand and the supply side separately.
Yeah.
In order to provide, on one hand, housing affordability, on the other hand, without having shocks to the market.
Yes. Yeah, that's very good insights there. Another thing that I'm keen to investigate with you, given the depth of expertise you have in this area. I hear just the other week that Tony Abbott has been making noises about slashing immigration, which from my own perspective, I just shake my head when I hear that, because we're a massive country that's still got massive opportunity. Why wouldn't we be encouraging people to continue to come to our country? And as a property driver, you know, a lot of the forward planning infrastructure and everything else has been predicated on strong and ongoing immigration. What's your thoughts if that gets any traction and the police start making noises about reducing immigration? What's your feeling on that subject and its impact on property?
Okay, look, in theory, if you go to school or uni, you can say, okay, let's try to cut immigration, yeah? Mm-hmm. But that's not the solution. Actually, Australia do need really strong immigration, and you just need to look at the big and successful economies, and even Australia, you have a lot of migrants. Right now, you can see even the CEO of Macquarie, right?
Yep.
You see us, you see many people, Peter Wagent, you see a lot of people who make a significant contribution to Australia or migrants, right? So
yes.
This is not a solution, particularly when you have skills shortage and you have a lot of young, talented people who can add value to Australia. Yep. The solution should come from a completely different angle. Proper and competent planning and execution of infrastructure and houses.
Yep.
Australia is a huge country, yeah?
Yeah.
But because of, let's call it systematic failure in planning and job creation, we have 43% of the people live in Sydney and Melbourne, which is unheard of. So instead of trying to cut migration and come with some creative and unrealistic ideas, instead of that, let's bring ideas and business investment and government investment, and let's boost the economy in WA, in North Queensland, in the Northern Territory. Let's improve those economies, and then you'll see the migration will go there, and these places will flourish. This is the right solution.
Yes.
And also in the big cities like Sydney and Melbourne, you need to have first world infrastructure. What are we talking about in Melbourne? 4,500 people. It's nothing. Yeah. If you compare that to really major cities, it's just a matter of planning and execution. That's all.
Yes, no, it's a very good call, and I think in addition to that, one of the other side benefits, Doron, is that everyone talks about the baby boomers and this mass that's moving through that will start dragging significantly on the public purse as far as that goes, and then leave a massive hole in terms of the skills gap that comes through. Why wouldn't we be encouraging skilled people from overseas to continue that creative burst, but also then become strong economic drivers as far as the income and growing incomes that will continue to sustain and drive the property market over time?
You have to, because unfortunately, I'm not sure if Australia has reached the 21st century. If you take as an example the technology, okay, because RiskWise is effectively a fintech, financial technology company, okay.
Yep.
And now, if you compare the strategy and the execution and the budget and the approach and the risk appetite that other countries have, okay, towards technology.
Yep.
And you can see that it's, regardless whether obviously it's the US that has the largest number of really good, successful companies.
Yep.
But you have a small country like Israel, less than around 8 million people, right?
Yep.
Their technology is booming. Even in Eastern Europe right now, they work on the technology. Even Saudi Arabia, they have a long-term plan to invest $500 billion and to create a huge city just to focus on technology and innovation.
Massive.
So this is the approach, and this is the future, and everyone knows that this is the future.
Absolutely.
The only thing is obviously to provide the funds and the incentives, because it doesn't drive itself innovation, right? This is a high risk industry.
Yes, absolutely. But you've got to sow the seed to get the benefits down the track. And I think that, without going too much off on a tangent here, Doron, that the biggest limitation we have is our political system, because it puts politicians in a position where they're only making decisions for the next 3 or 4 years. And there is no incentive then to take a much longer term view, and therefore most of the politicians don't have the courage or brave enough to make the long-term calls that might have short-term impacts.
Exactly. And the key thing is that currently we rely on still on mining, we rely on financial services. But if you have so many fintech, financial technology companies, it is highly likely that the entire landscape of the financial services will be completely different. And then what will you do? So you have two options. Option one, to be a leader and to be part of that fintech and the IT revolution.
Yeah.
Option two, you can stay behind. It's your call.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's absolutely spot on. And this protectionist thing that's always plagued Australia to some degree, I think we need to get over it and embrace the fact that we are part of a global village, and then use that to our advantage. Mate, that's awesome. One other thing that I just wanted to touch on, because I've sort of been doing some reading on some of the stuff that you've been putting out there to foster debate. And it's a really good one because you talk about which sex is better at investing and why. I'm very interested to get you to expand on that.
Oh, that's a funny one. So let's start with the bottom line. We have found that women are significantly better investors. They invest in lower risk properties and deliver higher returns. Okay?
Right.
Now, why is that? Because they have a certain process. Okay? They when they go and get ideas, proposals, brochures, whatever, the first thing is to say, maybe not. It looks good, but let me check. And we saw that on our website. I think that it was something like 65% of the users, or 67, are women, and only 35 or something is men. Yes, and you see also the reports, and they run different scenarios. The same thing, we also ran an analysis, and we also saw in buyer expos, many people bring models, women models, to attract buyers. And obviously these models attract only guys, right? So you go to an expo to learn about the new trends and whatever, and then you are loitering around, you see a beautiful model, she says hi, you also say hi. A couple of minutes later, you find yourself having a discussion with the sales manager. A couple of weeks later, you find yourself buying off the planning unit in Perth. A real story, by the way. Now,
interesting.
This could happen only to men. For women, there isn't such a thing that good-looking men will sell them some stuff. They perform the research. A lot of the women are well-educated.
Yeah. So
they read a lot, and they are by far less naive. With men, you can tell them there is a free event in the Hyatt with dinner and a free limousine that will pick you up from your house and get you back, and everything is free. We just need your presence. And men are innocent enough to believe that it's really for free. Women are going to say, okay, what's the catch? What are they trying to sell me?
Yeah.
How much is it?
Yeah.
So that's a completely different mindset.
Yeah, it's brilliant, because it's interesting in parallel with that, Doron. We do a lot of work with the medical professionals and the fly-in, fly-outs. And the conversation we often have with them is, well, one partner can generate the income, the other partner has the opportunity to build the wealth. And quite often, and not always, because there's a growing number of female FIFO workers and a growing number of female medical professionals. but quite often you'll see the male being the career income generator and their partners being the one that's actually creating the wealth. And with that conservatism and ability to look beyond the obvious that the female gender clearly comes with just through nature, that's a pretty good combination.
Yeah. Sometimes that's what you need, right? Two different sides. One who is bringing the ideas, and the second one who is challenging them.
Yeah, that's really interesting, mate. Look, I feel like I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to jump into what I call the ambush, Doron, and it's a bit of what I call the bushfire lightning round of a couple of key questions that I know that people will want to be getting their hands on the answers to. So kicking into that, what's your favourite quote and why?
Quote. Actually, it's kind of my quote, and basically just focus on your health, your wealth, your family, friends, and cut off the time that you spend on bullshit and negative things. Now, I want to explain on this one, because there's really nice quotes from Dalai Lama, who is by far obviously better than me. But what I mean is very simple. You see a lot of people who are depressed in the corporate environment. They just complain all the time, right? On Monday, you ask them, how's things? Yeah, okay for Monday. On Friday, how's things? Yeah, the best day ever because it's Friday and I'm going home in 5 hours, 43 minutes and 25 minutes, right? And they spend, a couple of hours a day on Facebook just to see great photos of a high school friend who bought a Ferrari or something, okay? And what's happening in the reality, they don't spend time on their health, right? They don't exercise, they don't spend enough time with their family, they don't have any plans for their career, for their wealth, for their retirement, for their vacation, for the community. And when I say community, I'm not just bullshitting. Yeah, I was an age manager in Bondi Naples, okay?
Yep.
You need to be there at 8 a.m., Sunday morning, rain, hail, or shine, right?
Yeah.
So it is what it is. So that's part of the things that is a good thing, right? So this is basically my approach. Just think positive about the things that you can do.
Yeah.
And don't spend time on all the other things like Facebook, because obviously in Facebook, no one is going to tell you that he has a drug problem or a drinking problem. No one is going to tell you, look, I'm so, my wife really doesn't like me because I beat my 2 young kids who are 3 and 5 years old, right?
Yeah.
No one is going to put that on Facebook, right? You're just going to see a really nice photo of a great family, right?
Exactly.
And you're going to say, wow, this guy is a really great family and all good. I'm so jealous. And you're going to spend time thinking how jealous you are.
And burning the time rather than putting into something that can actually put you in that situation. Yeah, exactly right. That's
exactly.
Brilliant. All right. Sort of switching from there, what's both the top book and the top podcast that you would recommend people read and listen to?
Okay, so the top book to me was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
When I read that book, and really read it slowly, I truly try to understand what's happening.
Yep.
It has made a big impact on me.
Yep.
I look at people differently in a sense that if someone, let's say my leadership team,
yep,
I listen to them more, right? They are the leaders of their areas. They need to lead.
Yep.
I need to listen. And it's anything in life. And the podcast, I think that yours is absolutely brilliant, really. It's good, it's smart, great people, down to earth. On one hand, brings a lot of knowledge, so I think that your podcast is spot on.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. I wasn't expecting that answer, but appreciate it very much. Now, one other quick thing that I hear a lot of people talk about, they all complain about how they pay too much tax. What's the top thing that you've done to minimise the tax that you pay?
Oof, not sure even when to start. Seriously, so many. Uh, Look, I've a business, and this is not my first time, as you can imagine. Any decision that I make, I think in advance about the tax. I'll give you the classic, obviously, is investment property negative gearing, right?
Yep.
So I bought, let's say, a house in Sydney 5 years ago.
Yep.
And when I bought that house as an investment, I thought about only one thing, about the capital growth
Yep.
and the net cash flow. And obviously the tax was a key factor, because if the a Commonwealth government is generous enough to give me a negative gearing and a capital gain tax concessions,
Yep.
so obviously for me it has a direct impact, right?
Yes.
The amount of out of the pocket, and for me, I pay sometimes nothing, sometimes I don't know, $100 or $200 a month.
Yep.
A house with a market value of deep into the seven figures. Another example, obviously, it's in the business slash personal life. When you think in advance, before we have started RiskWise, to set a family trust, to plan the tax in advance, when we have option plans, to think about the trust in advance before you allocate the options.
Yes.
Everything must be planned with tax experts first.
Yep.
And only then you execute. And therefore, you're minimizing legally your tax expenses. Yeah, you think in advance. Yeah, you're improving your tax flow. So
yeah,
and everything is legal, obviously. So everyone's happy.
Yeah, I love your thinking around that, and it's you're one of the few people I've spoken to who recognises if you're investing for the long term for capital growth, then the affordability of the property, in other words, how much is that property going to cost you per week in year 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15? If you haven't done the maths around that, and you just race out and buy a property that you can, and suddenly it's costing you $400 or $500 a week, and you're living on baked beans and can't go on holidays, you're not going to sustain it for very long. But if you're structuring it right, so you're using the right entities, as you say, like considering trusts and other mechanisms, and then you're taking advantage of depreciation and other incentives that are provided, that then minimises that out-of-pocket expense, so that from an affordability perspective it is sustainable, then you've got the best of both worlds. And your example of that property in Sydney that's enjoying massive growth but only taking a very small amount out of your pocket on a regular basis does make it then a sustainable opportunity that doesn't impact on your lifestyle, so that you can get on doing what you're doing while the property's looking after itself.
Look, it's crucial. It's like any other thing that you do. It's like when you buy a car, right? So if you want to buy a car, again, you think about it could be the taxation, and it could be also the service and the insurance and the reliability and the other stuff, right?
Yeah.
So what you need to do is just to think in advance before you make a big decision. It's not like going to a restaurant and you don't care if it's this coffee on the right-hand side or the left-hand side. And worst case scenario, the coffee is crap, let's just spill it to the bin. That's fine.
Yeah.
It's $1 million investment, so you need to be a bit more careful here.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, mate. Well, that's a nice segue into the next question. That is, what's the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received?
So the best is actually when I just started, the very wealthy businessman told me about investment. The only thing that you need to think about the risk is, can you sustain the property? Can you pay off whatever you need, or the mortgage for the first 3 to 5 years? That's it.
Yep.
If you have a good investment, the property value goes up, and if things go down, that's fine. Nothing happens. Go south, you can sell the property. You still have a really good buffer.
Yep.
So with that thinking, it improved first the risk practices. Again, I was not in my profession now.
Yep.
Practices and approach, number one. And number two, you say, that's fine. So there is a plan B to manage the things.
Yep.
Now, the worst one, it's not exactly advice. It's all the, sorry for that, all the junk mail that we get all the time from of the best top quality of the plan in the Brisbane, in the Perth, a Gladstone, whatever it is, some crap shit investments that that if you buy those investments off the plan tomorrow, or people will try to convince us, kind of independent companies, to convince us that I don't know, that Gladstone or the mining towns have some potential.
Yeah, they really don't know you very well, do they, Doron, if they're trying to convince you of that? Mate, just to close on then, what's a personal habit that contributes to your investment success? The
personal one is habit. Seriously, first one, I'm very optimistic person.
Yep.
That's the critical thing.
Yep.
And the second one, I like to exercise. So when I exercise, I have time to think.
Yes.
And this is actually the best. I've established this business, all the businesses and all the investments.
Yep.
Actually, when I was running or swimming or at the gym.
Love it. You're absolutely right. Not only does it make you feel good, it gets the adrenaline pumping, and it does clear your head, doesn't it? I'm like you. I'm exercise every day, and absolutely love it. It's the best part of the day for me. I normally do it early because I'm then ready to actually take on the day, and there's just nothing better. Absolutely. No, that's awesome, mate. Now, for those that are really keen, now they've had a good chance to understand you and where RiskWise is heading, what's next and new and exciting for yourself and RiskWise? What's coming up?
So currently, as you can see, we have very strong expansion in Australia. We work with all players from property investors, professionals, corporations, and lenders. Yep. The next stop for us is expansion to New Zealand next year.
Okay.
And a couple of years to the UK.
Excellent. Fantastic. Now, for those listeners who can now appreciate the real value to help them make informed decisions by getting RiskWise reports that enable them to look at what the future potential for a particular property is, how can they contact you and how can they get their hands on RiskWise reports?
Easy. So the first one, obviously, they can contact me by the email Doron, DORON .Peleg, PELEG @riskwiseproperty.com.au. And obviously, they can just go to our website, riskwiseproperty.com.au, and there is a landing page specifically for consumers. They can see a variety of reports and services that we offer.
Brilliant. Well, I'll certainly be encouraging them to do that. We'll make sure that those details are in the show notes, Doron, so that they can follow the link directly to you. Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's really good to talk to someone who truly does have an independent view of the property market and has a very structured scientific way of actually analysing where the market's heading. Part of the Get Invested podcast, I will be running sessions where we have periodic looks at what's happening around the traps. And if you're open to it, would love to have you as a very important part of that on a regular basis, mate. Would you be open to inputting your thoughts on what's happening in the market and what's driving it? Probably on a quarterly basis we're looking at doing that. Would that be of some interest to you?
Absolutely, yes.
Fantastic, mate. Well, look, really appreciate you giving me a lot of your time. It's been an awesome chat. I feel like we've only just touched the surface and am keen to continue the dialogue, Doron. So from myself and all the listeners from Get Invested, we really appreciate you spending some time today.
Thank you so much, and truly it was my pleasure, really.
Excellent, mate. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
How good was that? I hope you enjoyed it. To get a summary of all the investment gold and to get a copy of the show notes, email me on hello@khgroup.com.au. That's HELLO@khgroup.com.au. Or check us out at www.khgroup.com.au/Get Invested. And join me next week for another episode of the Get Invested podcast. Thanks for listening, and as always, dream as if you'll live forever and live as if you'll die tomorrow.